They told me straight to my face, "You don't belong here." My own family, people who should have stood beside me, made me feel like an outsider in the very place I had poured my heart into. But what they didn't know was that the story wasn't finished. Because sometimes the quietest person at the table holds the strongest card in their hand. Tell me, have you ever been pushed aside, only to rise up and reclaim what was rightfully yours? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear. Now let's get straight into today's tale. It began at a family gathering, one of those evenings where the house is full of noise, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but underneath, tension simmered. I had walked into that home, the one I had helped build and care for, with a smile. It wasn't just a building to me, it was years of hard work, memories etched into every corner, echoes of birthdays, holidays, and quiet nights. But the moment I entered the dining room, I felt it. The whispers, the sideways glances, my cousins huddled together, my siblings stiff at the table, and then the words fell, sharp and cold. "You don't belong here." It wasn't shouted, but it might as well have been. The sentence hung heavy in the air, settling on my shoulders like a weight. I laughed nervously at first, thinking it was a cruel joke. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to mask the sting in my voice. One cousin spoke up. "This place? It's ours now. You've had your time. It's better if you step aside." My chest tightened. Step aside? From the very place I had given so much to? From the walls that had seen me through joy and sorrow? I looked around the table, searching for someone, anyone, to defend me, but eyes shifted away. Forks scraped plates. Silence. That was the moment I understood. I was alone in this fight. I left that night without finishing my meal. The laughter of my relatives followed me out the door, but it wasn't warm laughter anymore. It was mocking, dismissive, the kind that tells you they've already written you out of the story. At home, I sat by the kitchen table, the house quiet around me, and let the hurt wash over me. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. Resolve. Because I knew the truth. I knew the papers tucked away in my drawer, the proof of ownership, the sacrifices I had made that no one could erase. They wanted me to believe I didn't belong. But the ink on those documents told another story. That night I whispered to myself, "They may say I don't belong, but I'll take back what's mine." And slowly a plan began to form. The days after that dinner stretched long and heavy. My phone buzzed with messages, none of them kind. "Don't come around so often. You've had your share. It's our turn now." One message even read, "Stop acting like this house is yours." Each word cut deeper than the last. These weren't strangers. They were my family, people I had stood beside through thick and thin, people whose children I had held, whose bills I had helped cover, whose tears I had wiped away. And now they wanted to erase me. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they were stressed. But then came the next gathering. I arrived with a dish in my hands, the way I always had. But instead of smiles, I was met with cold eyes. One cousin muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Why is she even here?" I set the dish down quietly, forcing a smile, but my hands trembled. Every laugh, every whisper felt like it was aimed at me. By the end of the evening, the message was clear. They no longer saw me as one of them. That night, back in my own kitchen, I pulled open the drawer where the papers sat. The deed, the legal proof, my name written clearly across it. I spread the pages across the table, smoothing the creases with my hands. "This," I whispered, "is the truth." I could have confronted them right then, stood up in the middle of dinner, waved the papers in their faces, demanded respect. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't change anything. Words thrown in anger would be dismissed, twisted, forgotten. No, I needed to be patient, to wait for the right moment, to let them dig their own hole until the truth would hit harder than anything I could say. So I went quiet. I stopped defending myself. I let them laugh, let them sneer, let them believe they had won. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And in that silence, I prepared. I met with a lawyer just to be sure every detail was in order. I checked the records, updated what needed updating, and made copies of every page. I tucked one set into my drawer, one into a folder I carried in my bag, and left another with someone I trusted. Each step steadied me. Each signature, each stamped page was a reminder. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. The next time they told me, "You don't belong here," I didn't flinch. I smiled politely, nodded, and let them laugh. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. The day was coming when those words would choke in their throats, and when that day arrived, it wouldn't just be me reclaiming my place. It would be the truth itself, loud, undeniable, written in black and white. I sat back in my chair, folded the papers neatly, and whispered, "When the time comes, they'll learn the hard way." It all came to a head one Saturday afternoon, another so-called family meeting. I walked in with my head high, but inside I braced myself. From the moment I stepped through the door, the air was sharp with judgment. My cousins sat clustered on the couch, whispering. My siblings avoided my eyes. And then my nephew, bold and careless, spoke the words aloud. "Why do you keep coming back? You don't belong here." The room went silent. Everyone froze, waiting for me to shrink, to retreat like before. But this time, I didn't. I set my bag on the table, unzipped it slowly, and pulled out the folder I had carried for weeks. "You know," I said quietly, "I've let you have your say. I've let you mock me, push me aside, pretend I don't matter. But today we deal in truth." I laid the papers flat on the table, spreading them out for all to see. "This," I continued, tapping the first page, "is the deed. My name, clear as day. This house, this land, it was my husband's and mine. When he passed, it became mine alone." A murmur rippled through the room, faces paled, eyes widened. "And here," I said, holding up the next page, "are the tax records, every payment made, every year, by me. Not you, not anyone else. Me." Silence. No one laughed this time. One cousin finally stammered, But we thought—" I cut her off gently, but firmly. "You thought wrong. You convinced yourselves of a lie because it suited you, but the truth doesn't change because you don't like it." I looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. This home is mine. Not because I shouted the loudest, but because I worked for it. Because I kept it standing when no one else lifted a finger. Because the law, the paper, the blood, sweat, and tears, it all points here. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her earlier bravado nowhere to be found. My siblings lowered their heads, shame flickering across their faces. I leaned back, folding the papers calmly. "You told me I didn't belong, but the truth is, you're the guests here. You come and go as you please because I allow it, not the other way around." No one dared to speak. The silence was thick, heavy with realization. For once, I wasn't the outsider. I was the one holding the ground beneath their feet. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the folder, and tucked it into my bag. Then I stood, smoothing the front of my blouse. "I don't need your approval to know who I am or what I own, but I won't let you rewrite history. This is my home. It always has been. And now you all know it." I turned toward the door, my footsteps steady. No one stopped me. No one dared. As I stepped outside, the sun hit my face, warm and bright. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest lifted. They had tried to push me out, to erase me, But the truth had stood taller than all their whispers, and they had learned, at last, whose house this truly was. The days after that meeting were strangely quiet. No more mocking messages, no more cold whispers when I entered a room. It was as if the very air around my family had changed, thick with guilt, heavy with the weight of truth they couldn't deny. For the first time in months, my phone buzzed, not with accusations, but with silence. And silence, in its own way, was sweeter than noise. The following Sunday, I hosted dinner. Out of habit, I set the table for everyone. Part of me wondered if they would even show up. But as the clock ticked, one by one, they arrived. My siblings walked in with downcast eyes. My cousins brought dishes, setting them down awkwardly on the counter. Even Emily, who had been the boldest in her remarks, came quietly, her steps careful, her voice low. The difference was palpable. At the table, conversation was hushed, uncertain. They glanced at me, then away, like children waiting to see if they were forgiven. For a while, no one mentioned the incident. It lingered in the air like smoke, unspoken, but undeniable. Finally, one cousin cleared her throat. "That meal, last time. We shouldn't have spoken to you the way we did." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall. I met her eyes and gave a small nod. Words matter, and so does truth. Across the table, Emily shifted uncomfortably. Then, in a voice softer than I had ever heard from her, she added, "I didn't realize how much this place meant to you." I spoke out of turn. Her words hung there, fragile, almost afraid. I let the silence linger before answering. "This house doesn't just mean something to me. It's part of me. Every nail, every beam. You don't dismiss that with a careless remark. You honor it, or you stay quiet." She lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed. For the first time, I saw not arrogance in her expression, but humility. My son, sitting beside her, finally exhaled. "I told you," he muttered gently to her, then looked at me with tired eyes. "Mom, I should have defended you sooner." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." The rest of the meal passed with more ease. Laughter returned, though softer, more respectful. The sharpness that once cut through every gathering had dulled, replaced with something tentative, but real, acknowledgement. After they left, I stood at the doorway, watching the taillights fade into the night. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the lonely quiet of before. It was peaceful. For months, I had let their words gnaw at me, shrinking under the weight of their dismissal. But tonight, as I walked through the living room, touching the photographs, the worn furniture, the walls that had held my life together, I felt something different. Vindication. They had tried to erase me, but in the end they were the ones humbled, not by shouting, not by revenge, but by proof, by patience, by truth written in ink and lived in decades of sacrifice. And that victory, quiet and steady, tasted sweeter than any triumph I could have imagined. I whispered to the empty room, "This is my home. It always will be." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it with every part of me. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself reflecting more than ever. Sitting by the window in the evenings, the house wrapped around me like an old, faithful friend, I thought about everything that had happened, the whispers, the laughter, the dismissal, and finally the silence when the truth came out. For a long time I had let their words echo inside me. "You don't belong here." 4 little words, yet they carried enough weight to make me question my place in the very space I had worked so hard to keep standing. But the truth is, belonging isn't something handed to you, it's something you build, brick by brick, year after year, with sweat, with sacrifice, with love poured into every corner. I remembered painting these walls with my husband, his laughter filling the room as we argued over colors. I remembered patching the roof one summer, sweat dripping down my face as I balanced on the ladder because we couldn't afford a contractor. I remembered Christmas mornings, birthday candles, and nights when the storm outside rattled the windows, but we stayed safe inside. That is what belonging looks like. Not entitlement, not loud claims made at a dinner table. Belonging is built through living, through giving, through years no one else bothered to carry. And that's why their words, as sharp as they were, no longer had power over me. They could claim, they could whisper, they could even sneer, but they could never erase the truth written in the very bones of this house. What struck me most was how quickly people forget the sacrifices made before them. The younger ones saw the house as just property, something to own, to divide, to decorate as they pleased. But to me, it was history, legacy, a place stitched together with memories that no paper could ever fully capture. That's the problem with arrogance. It blinds people to the shoulders they stand on, but arrogance always stumbles when faced with proof. And that day when I spread the papers across the table, they saw the truth they couldn't talk their way out of. It wasn't about humiliating them. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my place, my voice. And I realized, sitting there in the quiet, that I had given myself the greatest gift, the reminder that I belonged, with or without their approval. Now, when I walk through this home, I no longer feel the sting of their laughter. I feel pride in what I built, pride in the strength it took to stand up, not by shouting, but by simply presenting the truth. And if there's one lesson I carry from this, it's this. Never let anyone convince you that you don't belong in a space you poured your heart into. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way, and sometimes you need to remind yourself, quietly, firmly, that your worth is not theirs to define. This house is mine, and so is my story. So here's what I've learned. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from strangers, but from the people closest to us. My family thought they could erase me with words, thought they could claim what was never theirs. But in the end, proof spoke louder than pride, and the truth stood taller than their whispers. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it has to be reclaimed, not with anger, but with quiet certainty and the courage to stand your ground. Have you ever been told you didn't belong, only to remind everyone that you did, and always will? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale resonated with you, stay with us, because there are many more stories where dignity finds its voice, even in the face of doubt.